In part one of Ruth's story, we saw a painful beginning. Naomi had lost her husband and her two sons. Ruth had lost her husband too. Both women were walking into an uncertain future with no clear plan, no security, and no promise that life would become easier. But Ruth made a choice. She chose loyalty. She chose love. She chose to stay with Naomi, even when staying meant walking into the unknown. And now, as Ruth and Naomi arrive in Bethlehem, the next part of the story begins. But what Ruth did not know was this: sometimes the field you walk into just to survive becomes the place where God begins to restore your life. When Naomi and Ruth arrived in Bethlehem, they did not arrive with wealth. They did not arrive with a large family. They did not arrive with power or influence. They arrived as two widows. Naomi was carrying years of grief. Ruth was a foreign woman in a land that was not her own. They needed food. They needed help. They needed a way to keep going. And at that time, there was a practice in Israel that allowed poor people, widows, and foreigners to gather leftover grain from the fields after the workers had harvested. It was a way for those in need to survive with dignity. So Ruth said to Naomi that she would go into the fields and gather grain behind anyone who would allow her. Think about that moment. Ruth did not sit down and wait for life to feel perfect. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, but she took the next step in front of her. She went to work. She went to the field. She did what she could with what she had. And the Bible tells us that Ruth happened to come to a field belonging to a man named Boaz. At first, it may have looked like a coincidence. Just another field, just another day, just another attempt to survive. But in Ruth's story, what looked ordinary was actually becoming part of something much bigger. Boaz was a wealthy and respected man. He was also from the family of Elimelech, Naomi's late husband. When Boaz came from Bethlehem and saw the workers in the field, he noticed Ruth. He asked the man in charge of the harvesters, "Who is that young woman?" And the servant explained that she was the young Moabite woman who had returned with Naomi. He told Boaz that Ruth had asked permission to gather grain and that she had been working hard from morning until that time. Boaz did not ignore her. He did not treat her like she was invisible. He spoke to her with kindness. He told Ruth not to go and gather grain in another field. He told her to stay close to the young women working in his field. He told her that he had instructed the men not to harm her, and when she became thirsty, she could drink from the water provided for the workers. For Ruth, this was more than kindness. This was protection. This was provision. This was favor in a place where she could have easily been rejected. Ruth was deeply moved. She bowed down and asked Boaz why he was showing such kindness to her, especially since she was a foreigner. And Boaz told her that he had heard about everything she had done for Naomi. He had heard how Ruth left her father, mother, and homeland to come with Naomi to a people she did not know before. In other words, Ruth's quiet loyalty had not gone unnoticed. The decision she made on the road with Naomi was now speaking for her in a field in Bethlehem. And that is one of the beautiful lessons in Ruth's story. Sometimes the things you do in private, the sacrifices nobody claps for, and the loyalty you show when life is hard are not forgotten. Ruth had not been chasing attention. She had simply been faithful. And now, in a field she entered just to find food, favor was waiting. Boaz invited Ruth to eat with his workers. He gave her roasted grain. She ate and was satisfied and still had some left over. Then Boaz gave his workers special instructions. He told them to allow Ruth to gather among the bundles and not embarrass her. He even told them to pull out extra grain from the bundles and leave it for her to pick up. Ruth did not know it at first, but Boaz was making the hard road easier for her. By the end of the day, Ruth had gathered a generous amount of barley. She carried it back to Naomi, along with the food she had saved from the meal. When Naomi saw how much Ruth had brought home, she was surprised. She asked where Ruth had worked that day and blessed the man who had noticed her. Then Ruth told her the name of the man, Boaz. And when Naomi heard that name, something changed. For the first time in a long time, hope began to rise. Naomi explained that Boaz was a close relative. He was one of their family redeemers. This was important. In their culture, a family redeemer could help protect the family line, restore what had been lost, and provide a future where there had been emptiness. Naomi, who once said she came back empty, was beginning to see that maybe the story was not over. Ruth continued to work in Boaz's field through the barley and wheat harvests. Day after day, she gathered grain. Day after day, she stayed close to the women working in his field. Day after day, God was quietly preparing something. But Naomi wanted more for Ruth than survival. She wanted Ruth to have rest, security, and a future. So Naomi gave Ruth instructions. She told Ruth to prepare herself and go to Boaz at the threshing floor. This was not random. Naomi understood the customs of the time. She knew that Boaz, as a family redeemer, could play an important role in their future. Ruth listened to Naomi. Once again, Ruth showed humility and trust. She did not know exactly how everything would turn out, but she followed the guidance she was given. That night, Ruth went to Boaz quietly. When Boaz realized she was there, he asked who she was. Ruth identified herself and asked him to act as a redeemer. This was a bold and vulnerable moment. Ruth was not demanding, she was not forcing, she was placing her future before someone who had the ability to help. And Boaz responded with honor. He blessed Ruth and recognized her character. He understood that she could have pursued younger men, whether rich or poor, but she had chosen the path connected to family, faithfulness, and redemption. Boaz told her that everyone in the town knew she was a woman of noble character. But there was one complication. There was another relative who was closer than Boaz, and according to the custom, that man had the first right to redeem. Boaz did not ignore what was right. He did not rush ahead in selfishness. He promised Ruth that he would handle the matter properly. The next day, Boaz went to the town gate, the place where important matters were settled. He met with the closer relative and the elders of the city. He explained the situation concerning Naomi's family and the land connected to Elimelech. At first, the closer relative was willing to redeem the land. But when Boaz explained that redeeming the land would also involve Ruth, the Moabite widow, and preserving the family line of the dead, the man stepped back. He chose not to redeem. So Boaz accepted the responsibility. Before the elders and the people, Boaz declared that he would redeem what belonged to Elimelech's family and take Ruth as his wife, so that the family name would not disappear. This was the turning point. The woman who had walked into Bethlehem with uncertainty was now being covered with honor. The widow who went to the field just to gather leftovers was now becoming part of a restored family. The foreign woman who chose loyalty on a lonely road was now being welcomed into a new future. Boaz married Ruth, and in time, Ruth gave birth to a son. His name was Obed. When Obed was born, the women of Bethlehem rejoiced with Naomi. They blessed God because he had not left Naomi without a redeemer. Think about Naomi's journey. She left Bethlehem full and returned feeling empty. She came back with grief in her heart and bitterness in her words. She believed her story had become one of loss. But now she held a child in her arms, a child connected to restoration, a child connected to legacy, a child connected to hope. The women said that Ruth, who loved Naomi, was better to her than 7 sons. That is powerful. Because Ruth was not just a daughter in law, she became a gift in Naomi's life. She became proof that even when much is lost, God can still leave something precious beside you. Obed would later become the father of Jesse, and Jesse would become the father of David. That means Ruth became part of the family line of King David. And from that same line, generations later, came Jesus. This is where Ruth's story becomes even bigger than Ruth herself. What started with famine, funerals, grief, and uncertainty became part of a story of redemption that reached far beyond one family. Ruth could not see all of that when she chose to stay with Naomi. She could not see Obed, she could not see David, she could not see the generations that would come after her. She could not see how her painful beginning would become part of something eternal. All she saw was one choice, one road, one grieving woman she refused to abandon. And that is the lesson in Ruth's story. Sometimes the small, faithful decision you make in a painful season is bigger than you know. Sometimes you are not just surviving, you are being positioned. Sometimes what feels like a leftover field may become the place where favor finds you. Sometimes the person God uses to help restore your life may be waiting in the ordinary place you almost overlooked. Ruth's story teaches us that pain is not always the end of the story. Loss does not mean God has stopped working. A difficult beginning does not mean there cannot be a beautiful ending. Naomi thought she came back empty, but God was already writing restoration through Ruth. Ruth thought she was simply gathering grain, but God was arranging redemption. Boaz thought he was doing what was right, but his obedience became part of a legacy much greater than he could imagine. This is why Ruth's story still speaks today. It reminds us that loyalty matters, character matters, faithfulness matters. The way you treat people in their broken season matters. The quiet decisions you make when nobody is watching matter. You may be in a season where life does not look like what you expected. Maybe you are rebuilding after loss. Maybe you are starting again. Maybe you are doing small things every day, wondering if they matter. Ruth's story reminds us that they do. Keep walking, keep doing what is right, keep showing up with faith, because sometimes God begins the next chapter in the very place where you were just trying to survive. This was Ruth's story, a story of pain, a story of loyalty, a story of favor, a story of redemption, and a reminder that what looks like the end may only be the place where God begins to rewrite the ending. If this story encouraged you, subscribe to Lesson in the Story for more meaningful Bible stories and life lessons, because every story has a lesson.